if I take off the video, does it just share the screen? Why don't we
Hi, Anthony. Terry here. Saying hello.
We hear you, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Hi, Anthony. This is Jewel doing a sound check.
We hear you loud and clear, ma'am.
Awesome. Thanks.
Anthony, I'm joining from my ancient laptop because I'm in a meeting until 1 on my other laptop. So once I have my other laptop free, I'm going to join for a second time here, and then I'll drop this connection. Will it let me do that?
Yes, ma'am. I'll be on the lookout because you'll join as an attendee, and I'll promote you to panelist so you can participate.
Perfect. Okay. Letting you know. Thanks.
Hello, Brian White from Alliant is on.
Hi, Brian. We hear you.
Great. Thank you for confirming.
Dennis Mulqueeney from Alliant is on as well.
All right. Good afternoon, sir. We hear you loud and clear.
Great.
There. Oh, Desmond's here.
Good afternoon, sir. We hear you loud and clear.
Thank you.
Looking good, sir. We're just
Thanks.
Hi, Anthony. Doing my second sound check. This is Terry Casterland.
We hear you, ma'am. I just returned the link, sir. Just waiting for it to connect. Yes, sir.
I would like to call to order the special meeting of the North County Transit District for November 19th, 2020. And I will ask Anthony Flores, the clerk of the board, to call roll.
Yes, sir. Jack Feller,
Here.
Tony Krantz,
Here.
John Franklin, Paul McNamara,
Here.
Jim Desmond,
Here.
Terry Gasserland,
Here.
Joel Edson,
Here.
Sharon Jenkins, Priya Bapato.
Okay,
Might be her.
she'll be with us here pretty quick. So I would like to ask Anthony to now provide a safety briefing and review the evacuation procedures.
Yes, sir. In the event of emergency, I'll dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please exit using the stairs. Do not use the elevator. Once cleared of the building, do not re-enter unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers and fire alarms on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator located on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, sir.
Okay, thank you. Priya indicates she's here, but her mic is locked out. So, and Anthony, do we have any public comments today for?
We do, sir. We have 235 total public comments, 234 of which are related to agenda item W2. 175 are opposed to the fencing in Del Mar and Encinitas. 55 request that we delay fencing in Encinitas until crossings have been built. We have 4 that are in favor of crossings for safety reasons, and the remaining public comment is related to the MOU between NCTD and Encinitas regarding temporary parking.
Okay, thank you. And I believe there's a link on our website to those comments.
Yes, sir. Yes, those have been provided to the board and made available to the public.
Okay, very good. With that, we will move into our workshop, and there are 2 items today that we're going to review. And first up, Jacob Gould, the Senior Legal Counsel, will present item W1.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacob Gould. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about insurance. The district purchases a whole bunch of different forms of insurance. The one we're talking about today is our liability renewal. We purchased that through our broker, Alliant, and we have several layers which need to be filled. And we just wanted to come to you today and kind of tell you what we've been doing in the background and what we're looking at going forward. I have Dennis Mulqueeny and Brian White from Alliant on the line, ready to walk us through the market and our specific renewal circumstances. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dennis and Brian.
Great. Thank you very much. I believe I'm off unmute. I'm unmuted now, so I assume everyone can hear me. So this is Dennis, and I've got Brian White on the line as well. And we'll walk through this presentation with you guys. The idea here is to give you a backdrop of your insurance program and forces that are shaping the renewal for this year's liability program. So what we're talking about here is the liability coverage that provides coverage for, when third-party damages that you might cause someone in the operation of the business, i.e. the buses and the rail. So the presentation, we talk a little bit about, once you go to the next slide, we talk about the market conditions, and then we'll talk a little bit about your program. So it's been a big year in the insurance industry, big year for a lot across the global economy, of course, with COVID. And the way I kind of think about insurance is all of the ills of society sort of ultimately end up in the insurance bucket, as it were. So there's a lot of things that have been changing this year, accumulation of things over the past several, but walking through, most obviously, the pandemic has significantly impacted insurers with losses. There's a lot of talk about what parts of a program are covered, where does your insurance apply? It's complicated, but long and short is the insurance industry will probably sustain about 100 billion of losses just from the global pandemic. Uncovered losses are much greater than that, but we expect that that just the pandemic itself will cost 100 billion in this year. Another big topic we'll talk about in more detail is the concept of social inflation, which is effectively the impact of runaway jury verdicts on the insurance industry, and obviously, businesses and governmental entities that have to deal with runaway jury verdicts. The insurance industry is weakening of their reserves and payouts of the last few years, so they have less money in reserve. Interest rates, of course, are low, so it's hard to earn on whatever capital you have. It's hard to earn a decent rate of return. Severe weather, continuing with climate change, you've got increased activity of hurricanes and obviously wildfire in California, which I'm sure you've seen and are all aware of. The resulting here is that mostly you have carriers who are experiencing, because of such pressure on their balance sheets, a limiting of what they're willing to extend in the form of insurance. And as your capacity for insurance diminishes, the price of insurance goes up. Further, there's regulatory pressure on everyone. And long and short, I'm not going to go through all of these, but you get the point, where we find ourselves in one of the hardest insurance markets, certainly over the last 15, 20 years, certainly since probably Hurricane Katrina. We haven't seen pressure on the market. And prior to that, after 9/11, the pressure on the market, I would argue, is as hard as it's been in my 30-year career, is where we are right now. So next slide, please. Not to check other kind of more specifics here. The catastrophic losses, the industry is driven a lot by hurricane season and what happens. And you'll see here in this slide that there's a rising trend of catastrophic losses. Certainly 2017 was the worst on record, and 2018 was the third worst on record. That 2017 was, you might remember, Harvey, Irma, and Maria, the hurricanes affectionately known as HIM. Harvey, Irma, Maria was that year. 2019, which was a third worst in sort of catastrophic losses. But 2020 is shaping up to be worse than 2019. So although the numbers aren't out for 2020, the year isn't finished, it's shaping up to be another difficult year. Not as bad as 2017, but certainly probably close to 2018. Next slide, please. So wildfires, we're all painfully aware of wildfires and what's been going on. What's interesting is that the wildfire over the last, I'd say, 15 years, we haven't worried too much about wildfire, but certainly over the last 3, it's become a very hot topic, no pun intended, with the insurance community. And we're seeing all sorts of cutbacks in terms of wildfire. Now, while this doesn't directly impact your liability renewal, because wildfire is a property problem, property insurance problem, the hits to the balance sheets of insurers are causing them to cut back further. So I don't think I need to belabor the wildfire point. I think we're all living that. Next slide, please. What was a factor that is directly impacting your renewals is concept of social inflation. And what that phrase is sort of a catch-all for a number of bullet points that you can see there. What we're referring to in terms of social inflation is the increased value of jury verdicts, and the insurance industry itself is seeing a huge uptick. Pick a few points out. There's pervasive media influence. You've got, headlines of major jury verdicts that are, causing people to imagine that they can actually win the lottery just by filing a lawsuit. And so we're seeing that happening. There also is a growing growing industry of litigation funding, the second to the last bullet, whereby you've got folks willing to invest in plaintiff attacks on owners, such that you can now get your lawsuit funded by third parties who will take a piece of the action if you win. So that's driving a lot of the industry right now. And then, of course, the polarized political climate doesn't help. And what we're finding is that when plaintiff attorneys go into the courtroom, they're not just trying to paint the defendant as negligent. They're trying to paint the defendant as actually irresponsible and almost evil, which is driving the cost as well. So the industry, next slide, please. What we're seeing is that jury verdicts are way up, and insurance companies are reacting. They're recognizing that they have just not been charging enough money for the insurance in these high excess layers. If you go to the next slide, please, you'll see these big payouts in the jury environment or the legal environment. And a lot of the payouts have to do with sort of auto or transportation issues, trucking, auto, and whatnot. And there's more. This is some big claims, but the trend is that for auto, the trend is worse than for just your general liability. If you flip to the next slide, your reasons, of course, are your distracted driving, impaired driving, aggressive driving, and if you are involved in this space as an insurer, you're having to deal with changing patterns in driving behavior. And maybe more explicit on the next slide here is, you'll see here the blue line is what's called a loss ratio for insurers over the past 6 years, and the blue line is auto, and the green line is all other P&C, property and casualty lines. And what a combined ratio is dollars in versus dollars out to the insurance industry. And below 100%, it means that for every dollar that comes in, dollars paid out are less. And for numbers above 100% is dollars paid out is greater than the dollars paid in to the industry as a whole. So the point of this slide is that the auto insurers who are engaged in taking on transit risks are seeing much worse results than with the other lines of coverage that they offer, such that they have to push rate on their premiums to try to bend that curve back down and try to get it closer to 100%. Next slide, please. The other key component of North County's risk is rail operation. In rail operation, you've got these number of accidents that have occurred, big accidents that have occurred since 2010. And so it's a real risk. These, of course, these losses are infrequent, but when they happen, they're big in terms of dollars. Next slide, please. So all of these things are impacting our ability to obtain, cost-effective insurance. There's some good news, bad news things here in this slide. I would say, we've talked about nuclear verdicts and social inflation. The tort liability cap that remains unchanged over prior years. Crossings continues to be an area of concern. So anything you guys can do and have been doing as respects, safety of your crossings is really important. You guys do a great job on your contract operations and maintenance, and that you shift a lot of your liability to operators where you can. And certainly what a real high point is when we're talking to underwriters about your program is the extensive work and sort of leading edge work that you've done on your positive train control. So when we talk to underwriters, we talk about these kinds of things, and it's a long sort of negotiation. Next slide, please. We've talked about market withdrawal. We've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 or 12 insurance carriers who are offering coverage have just withdrawn from the space completely. And as I had mentioned earlier, when your supply is reduced, your rates basically go up. Next slide, please. So specific to North County Transit, what we've been doing is we've had long discussions. We started fully 3-4 months ago working on the renewal of your program. Normally we travel to London and discuss your program with underwriters. This year we had virtual meetings with the markets in London, and this year we had Jacob and your team participated in extensive virtual meetings with underwriters. We probably over 2 days, we had separate conversations with 15 separate underwriters at Lloyd's of London in order to highlight the strength of what you guys do in order to negotiate the best terms and conditions of coverage. So I would say that what's sort of interesting or great about your program is you guys haven't had significant loss experience at all. So all the changes and impacts on your program are market based as opposed to anything you guys yourselves are doing. We would emphasize that whatever you may do to continue to focus on ways to mitigate losses, whether it be fencing and paying attention to crossings, that's a positive thing for your program. The next slide is sort of like if you go to the next slide, this is sort of where the rubber is hitting the road in terms of cost. We're midstream, and your program doesn't renew until a month or so from now, but obviously we want to get it put to bed as soon as possible. But the earlier we push for resolution, we lose the ability to negotiate sort of best terms. So right now where we're at is the first 5 rows are fixed, and the last 6 through 9, where you've got Lloyd's of London penciled in, those are our cost estimates, high and low. So we're working right now with a range of between 3.3 and 4.1 million to buy your $295 million worth of coverage. And that's a significant increase, obviously. Over last year, we're looking at the low end around 20% over last year, and at the high end at about 48%. We're going to be able to learn, this morning through some of our more detailed conversations, we'll be able to negotiate some terms and conditions that might push us down to the lower end of the range here, but we're not quite there yet. This is as of a week ago, and nothing has happened in the last week to make the picture here deteriorate. Frankly, over the last week, we're slightly more confident that we'll be at the lower end of the range, but when you're working towards a not to exceed, we also want to give you what your possible worst case scenario is. The next slide would be, the costs are changing. In 2018, your total cost was around 1.9. Last year, your total cost was about 2.8. And then in 2021, the cost would be about 3.3 at the low to 4.1. I would want to just reiterate that you're not alone in seeing these types of increases. You are in a unique space, being a governmental entity in California operating transit, which is probably the most challenging class of business that's out there. But the good news, I would suppose, take from this, it's market driven. It's not anything that North County Transit itself is driving because of, call it bad behavior. You're actually an excellent in the space. North County Transit is a good risk, but the pressure on the market overall is such that prices are being driven north for the reasons previously mentioned. Next slide. There are a couple of changes that are specific to the program, but that are being driven by the environment that we're in. The most obvious is your program historically has been silent on whether or not there's any coverage for communicable disease. And because of COVID-19, every carrier now is writing in specific exclusions for any sort of coverage surrounding communicable disease. It's not necessarily thought of as a big risk for North County, but a place where things have been silent is now being carved out for obvious reasons. And the rail liability coverage right now, your coverage is broadest at the bottom, the first, call it 0 to 40 million. And then where your coverage is focusing most on the catastrophic rail liability loss, the coverage narrows. And so where that narrowing is going to take place, in order to negotiate best terms and conditions, the catastrophic coverage will probably, where the coverage narrows, will probably be lower than it was. I want to restate that. Last year, I think it's at 55 million is where your coverage sort of starts to narrow to cover just catastrophic rail loss. And that might drop to, call it, 40 million, where your coverage begins to narrow. And again, on bus, the bus, where you're, the extent to which you have bus coverage for the bus operations now, you're at 55 million, and that might drop a little bit in order to get best terms and best pricing. Reduction in aggregate of limits, what that means, how many times does your coverage, can you shoot through the tower of your coverage? Right now, it's 1.5 times, and it probably at the renewal would be 1 time, but you'll have a reinstatement, meaning that if you do have a catastrophic loss, you'll be able to buy to reinstate your limits through a reinstatement provision that we're negotiating. So overall, not a great story in terms of cost and coverage. But the one takeaway I would say is that North County Transit is doing all the right things in terms of presenting itself to the market. It's been the most difficult and comprehensive, complicated conversations we've had in the market for a number of years. And I don't know if Jacob wants to point to any topics that we discussed in our virtual meetings with underwriters, but he and others on your staff did a great job in our negotiations with underwriters. And that's it. So questions, discussion.
Yeah, before we jump into questions, I think the key takeaway for this is, one, we're kind of riding the wave that the market has thrown out. But two, in our discussions with the underwriters, it became very clear the things that they were concerned about are the things that we've been talking about, for the last couple of years. Risk reduction, safety issues, PTC was a huge conversation, as well as crossings and other items. And so, it's good to keep that in the back of your mind when we talk about our insurance portfolio. Not only is it the premiums that we're discussing, but also the overall risk to the district that kind of dictates that. So far, we've been very proactive in those projects, and we've been able to really only get hit once. We got hit by the market, and we got hit pretty hard. But we haven't been hit by any excessive loss runs or large claim determinations by a court or settlement or otherwise. And so that puts us in a pretty good position. And so as we go forward with our capital project programs and our safety programs and what we're going to talk about later on today, we just wanted you to have an understanding of not only where we're going, but also why we do all these other things that we do. It's not only just for our insurance premiums, but also the overall risk, liability, and portfolio for the district. So with that, we'll go into any questions or any discussions you may have.
Vice Chair Feller.
I took note of the crossings, and we're doing preventive things all up and down the corridor, and this pertains mostly to the train, but is that crossings that are legal crossings or crossings that are illegal?
Yeah. So NCTD only has legal crossings. Anywhere else where we don't have a legal crossing is trespassing. And so when we talk to the underwriters about our crossing programs and our upgrades, we're talking about our wayside horns, our quiet zones, our pedestrian gates, our improved signal program. Even PTC comes into play when we start having those conversations. Yeah.
Okay, so the liability doesn't fall on us when it's trespassing.
Well, that's a whole other ball of wax.
Okay.
Yeah, those where we have claims for strikes or anything else, that's where Dennis was talking about those nuclear verdicts and things like that. We do have to be very aware of those. And so anything that we can do to mitigate that risk, is beneficial, not only for the insurance portfolio and that premium, but as well as the liability portfolio we carry.
Yeah, I would add that Jacob's exactly right. It's a different legal question whether someone is at a crossing that's authorized versus whether they're trespassing. You still could get dragged into a case when it's an illegal crossing. It's just a different argument that you're making in front of a jury.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Edson.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Is the SIR a one time during a calendar year, or is it per?
Yeah.
The SIR is our self-insured retention amount, and so we
Yes.
maintain that.
Yes, I understand.
And that's basically going to be for any potential claim.
Okay, so it counts for each claim. The district's on the hook for that SIR.
Our insurance really kicks in at that, the $2,001 is where our insurance portfolio kicks in.
Per occurrence.
Per occurrence. That's what I was asking for. Thank you.
Board Member Gasterlin.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Could you go back to the NCTD slide 1 of 4?
Sure.
There we are. So actually, I'm sorry, it was 2. There. So I want to make sure that I understand what this is. So you have 9 different layers here, and
Right.
so these are different options for levels of insurance, or would NCTD
Yeah, I'll speak to that. So they're not. You're required in some of your agreements with third parties to carry 295 million of total limits, because that's also the tort cap on rail operations. So we buy for you up to 295. In theory, what the limit you buy is your option, your choice. But some agreements you have in place dictate that you buy to the full 295, which we would argue is reasonable. You could have a claim that would easily hit that number, right? So it might sound like a lot, but rail liability claims are nasty when they happen. So the option, there isn't necessarily an option shown here. That would be a longer conversation about what limit to buy to. That certainly can be had. But we're showing a low end versus a high end, meaning we're expecting at your total cost for the renewal will be between 3.3 million and 4.1 million. And what we've done is we've shown here that in each layer of coverage, part of the trick is trying to figure out where to split your layers to get the most cost-effective rate per $1 million of coverage. And this right now is the most efficient way to buy the 295 in layers of 10, then to 15, then to 25, 30, so on and so forth. So you're stacking different insurance companies on top of each other in order to get to the full limit, because no one insurance carrier will write the whole $295 million limit. And then, does that make sense? I could go on, but it's.
Yeah, no, that's good. So explain to me the limit and attachment column. For example, Lexington is 10 million by 2 million SIR. And then the next layer is 5 by 10 by 2. So what's the difference between those?
Yeah, the X is short for excess. So it's 10 million excess of 2 million. Then the next layer is 5 million excess of 10 million excess of 2 million. It's insurance notation. I should have made that simpler to read. So the X, read the X as excess of.
Okay, so the bottom line here is that all 9 of these layers would be needed for NCTD to accomplish the 295 million.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
So then on the next slide, 3 of 4, 295 million in total limits, parentheses, excess of 2 million self-insured retention. I think you just explained to me what excess of 2 million, well, the notation is there, but what exactly does that mean? Excess of 2 million self-insured retention.
Right. So your insurance policies, Paul, let's assume for just a moment that the 295 million is one policy. It's a tower of coverage. That tower of coverage sits on top of your self-insured retention would be akin to a deductible. So you guys carry, let's just for argument's sake, call it a deductible, a $2 million deductible. So you're not going to hit your tower of coverage until any one claim is excess of $2 million. Now you self-fund, you fund for that $2 million. You keep money set aside to pay for your claims, but you're only asking the insurance companies to be involved in any one claim when it's excess of $2 million in the claim value. So you'll have an actuary project for you what your claims are in that $2 million layer. And it's cheaper, frankly, over the long run to self-fund the first 2 million than it is to try to buy insurance policy that attaches below 2 million.
Okay, thank you. So on this slide also, the 2018, I'm just going to give the first year in each of these columns. So the 2018 total cost is, I'm rounding, 2 million. The 2019 is 3 million. And the anticipated for 2020, we'll just call it 4 million. So basically, this is going up by $1 million a year. And that's being driven by the market. Right. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Yes. And, our hope here is that that 4 is closer to 3.3, but we don't want to, come back to you and say we were off by a big number. So that 4.1 is sort of your worst case for the renewal. The way you could, and you could impact that number, if we say, well, rather than self-funding the first 2 million of each and every, what happens if we self-fund the first 5 million of each and every? And then it becomes a question of, well, what does your actuary say you need to put aside to take on 3 million more of risk? And can you transfer that risk to the insurance company cheaper than your actuary would suggest that you self-funded at? So the work that we've done indicates that the 2 million is the break point where you get the most bang for your buck in the current market. So maybe on your own homeowner's policy, you get a reduction if you're willing to take a higher retention, higher deductible. It's the same concept, but at some point, there's a break point where there's no real more credit given above a certain deductible level because the probabilities change.
So
you go.
is the size of the deductible what's driving the difference between the 3.3 and the 4.1? What drives that differential of $700,000?
Market. Well, the market and really what's what we've learned in the last 24 hours, what's driving that is a lot of our carriers in London are just not thrilled about bus exposure. Not necessarily for you guys, just in general. When we were talking earlier in the presentation about auto claims, there's a lot of Lloyd's underwriters who are now shying away from anything having to do with bus, and they're primarily saying we're comfortable with the rail. It's the bus that we don't like. So that differential of 700,000 really is trying to get the best syndicates at Lloyd's to give you the best rate. And the ones that are willing to do that are the ones that don't really want the bus exposure. If that helps clarify.
Yeah, very helpful. So is there an opportunity to separate out the different liabilities, railroad liability from bus liability?
Yeah, the fun part, or fun for me, not for any of you, but is figuring out exactly where you start getting a credit for reducing the coverage and bifurcating your bus and your rail operations. Historically, you were not being charged for the bus exposure. And so we would build that in as much as possible because no one was charging for it. So you might as well get, the bang for the buck. You get more coverage when you're not having to pay for it. And what we're seeing now is that credit, the differential is dropping lower in the tower. Right now, if we strip all the bus out, you would not get a break. It's kind of at about the 25, 30, 40 million where it really starts to matter. But in your primary layer, call it your first 25 million, I'm just rounding my layers, you're not going to get a credit by taking the bus out, but you are getting a credit by taking it out in the higher layers.
Gotcha. Okay.
And just to clarify, we do currently separate. We have our bus limit right now is the 55, as Dennis had said, and then the remainder is our rail. So that's when he talks about the limit and where that cutoff is. It is capped right now.
Okay.
Yeah, the bus is capped at 55.
Bus is capped at 55. Okay. Now, next question. How many liability claims have there been for NCTD that have been paid out in the last 5 years?
In your tower, above 2 million, I'd say 0 from memory here. Brian might or Jacob might.
Yeah, so I'd have to go back to our loss run to give you every payout number, but we have never breached our SIR, which is one of the factors when we're talking to the underwriters is how we've been able to maintain the $2 million. A lot of, as Dennis can tell you, a lot of other agencies, especially those that have a liability cap similar to ours, have a $5 or a $10 million self-insured retention requirement in order to make it.
Totally correct. You're $2 million compared to your peers, the 2 million is low as an attachment point. And the reason you're able to keep it that low is because you haven't breached it. Now you have liability claims, run-of-the-mill claims that you deal with in your self-insured retention as they come. But to answer your question, you have not penetrated your tower, which is excellent.
Okay, so you've anticipated my next question, which is what happened? Let's take an example. If a $10 million claim happened next month, how would that change the cost of this insurance?
That's an excellent question. And this is Brian White. I'll jump in here. I work with Dennis at Alliant. So what happens with claims, they become sort of their own animals. So if something happens tomorrow where there's a loss, unless it's actually a coaster train that hits another coaster train or another train or some sort of catastrophic event where you immediately know there's 10 or 20 fatalities and you're talking about losses in the tens of 20s of million. If it's not one of those events, it'll actually take time in order to determine what the full scale of the loss will be. these liability claims sometimes takes years to determine. And if they're one of these issues where liability is disputed, i.e. a trespasser, however, it was an area where there was a history of trespassing and, it was a known issue, and, you should have done something, but you didn't, you may not know what the results are of that for years down the road. And in those cases, a lot of times we set those claims aside in our negotiations and say, hey, yeah, that's out there, but we really don't know what's going to happen. And then, 2 or 3 years down the road, when it does happen, then, there's a conversation about, okay, is $2 million the right retention amount? And that would be answered through the negotiation process. And if we're in a market where things are very competitive and soft, like we actually have been up until probably 20 months ago, we may be able to find someone else willing to still continue to do the $2 million retention because they're able to treat that loss as an outlier, right? They do happen, from time to time, but it's a one-time thing and you set it aside. If we're in this market now where things are very difficult, we could be in a position of being, really sort of forced by the market by virtue of the fact that we have no one else willing to accept or give us a $2 million retention, where we actually have to take more risk, whether that's 3 million, 4 million, or 5 million will really depend on the appetite of the markets and the specific of the claims at that point. Now, going back to where I was, like if we have a catastrophic event tomorrow where it's clear 10 or 20 people died and there was negligence, right out the gate, our coverage is good through the remainder of the year, right? And we would probably trigger that reinstatement of limits that Dennis was talking about before. So there's that issue. But then we would probably start the renewal process instead of starting it, 120 days or more out like we do in a sort of a more normal traditional year. We would probably be starting our renewal negotiations 6 months in advance and doing a series of conversations with the marketplace to have more clarity about what the SIR would be, at the next renewal.
Right.
So there's a lot of what ifs there. Hopefully I gave you sort of what you were looking for.
Okay, so my last question. So I'm gonna use an example that's a little bit of an absurd example, but I want to use an example that's not in Del Mar. So the railroad goes through the Los Penasquitos Lagoon, and it's on a track through that lagoon. If somebody decides they're going to walk out there and be on that track and the train hits them, does it make a difference if NCTD has completely fenced the track through the lagoon, or fences after the fact of that event, or simply increases signage because that is considered sufficient for keeping a person from deciding they're going to go walk on the tracks?
Excellent question. And I think, it really is about what's the appropriate, reasonable kind of standard of care, and it's sort of a legal question. So, and people will look at, did you do what you were supposed to do in that situation? If you can answer that question and say yes, then, I think arguably you've got a good defense. If there was a report issued, 3 years ago, and it said you need to do these 4 things and those were never done, then those become problematic. And we've seen claims like that, with a large state that we work with, where they were supposed to put barriers around concrete dividers in the middle of a freeway. And there was a car full of teenagers, and they were unfortunately, had drugs in their systems. And despite all of that, that makes it appear that you'd have a good defense. They found a report somewhere that said, you were supposed to actually build a berm up and to better protect these. And therefore, state, you're on the hook for this. So, it really kind of depends on the specific facts and circumstances of that incident and how you would craft your defense, according to whatever the plaintiff alleges.
Right.
In addition to that, though, we've also got just the issues as Brian had stated, when you have a tight market like we're in now, even if we're 100% right, we defend it. But still get a verdict because of the social inflation, nuclear verdicts, those types of things. Even if we can set it aside, I think what Brian was saying earlier is if, we really only have one shot to fill a layer and we've got this thing hanging out there, we may not be able to fill that layer. If it's the first 5 million, we may not be able to do that. And so I think one of the things we have to remember is that, we don't have sort of a crystal ball of what's going on in the future. We can only extrapolate from the past. And as you can see on this slide here, it's going up, and I've had no indication, and Brian and PJ can clarify, but I've had no indication that we're looking at this going down significantly and getting back to the rates we had 5-6 years ago. And so that's one of the key things that we wanted to highlight as part of this market update, is that all the things that we can do to make sure our nose is as squeaky clean as possible as we go into each renewal cycle helps us on both fronts.
And if I could chime in a little bit on that. So in my other unpaid job, I serve as the chair for the CEO committee for the American Public Transportation Association Commuter Rail Committee and CEO committee. This is one of the top 3 issues that we are working on from a legislative and industry perspective. We've actually had a focused teleconference over the last couple of months, and I invited our friends from Alliant to come in and speak to the depressed group of CEOs who are experiencing this, plus pains of not even being able to find carriers to place all of their insurance. So one of the things that the industry is doing is APTA is now advancing a study that we're going to use as the basis to hopefully create a regulatory framework to come up with a solution for us from an industry point of view, because this is clearly money that we're paying to people who are outside of the U.S. By and large. The market is now shrinking, the costs are going up. For us, and Laura, you will correct me if I'm wrong, within our shared use agreement, we said we would go to the statutory cap of $295 million and stay there. So originally when I got here, I think we were at $50 to $75 million worth of insurance. And if you remember, we had within this region, Metrolink had that Chatsworth accident, and then there was a subsequent accident. And so all of this stuff came into focus. And then right around this time over the last 10 years or so is where you've seen the enhanced focus of, we can't really control what's happening in this market, even despite our safety record. It is now shifted really in terms of risk mitigation and risk avoidance, whether it be positive train control or doing any kind of activity you can to prevent yourself from being in that place of having an incident and either having to increase your reserves or not being able to place that additional insurance. So that's where the industry is going on it. This is a big deal issue for all of us right now.
Good. So I'm seeing the 3.3 million to 4.1 million driven by the buses. So what do the claims cost each year? How many claims annually, and what's the annual legal costs and claims costs for handling those claims?
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. We can pull that up for you, certainly. But these costs, the claims that are coming in on the bus side, as we alluded to at the beginning, are not NCTD claims or NCTD payouts that are driving that number. It's the industry as a whole. And if you look back at some of the beginning slides, you can see where the verdicts on these claims for a single death, multiple injury have gone through the roof in the last 5-10 years. And that's the factor that's driving it. And it's just by the nature of, while there's a number of trains that are running, there's an order of magnitude, more buses on the road that are potentially getting involved in accidents. And so that's the driving factor. NCTD.
But clarity, Jacob, and you correct me, under our bus contract, MV provides that insurance.
And that's where I was going.
And so the insurance that we have is a backup in case they have a catastrophic event above that. So we're not actually adjudicating claims with our insurance, as opposed to rail, where we indemnify the contractor and we cover all of the operations for rail.
Correct. So under our bus operations contract, they hold $10 million and $20 million worth of insurance. To my knowledge, nothing has ever breached even that. But we've never even been involved in any of those claims. So we have that protective layer for NCTD on the bus side specifically.
And what about on the track side?
The tracks are either going to be covered under property, should something occur, or under the casualty liability and the 295 cap. That we hold as first position. When we did the Bombardier contract, we tried to shift that liability similar to the way that NCTD structures the bus program. But as the owner and operator, if it wasn't something Bombardier did, if it was just something that happened because the tracks existed, we would still need to cover ourselves with the 295 because we don't want to be exposed for that risk. And so by shifting that liability to a potential contractor, we essentially doubled the liability coverage for the same asset. The contractor would have to carry 295 and NCTD would carry 295, and the insurance market basically rejected that idea. And so we actually went in post-award with a supplemental agreement to shift that back so that we could actually obtain insurance. And I don't see that changing in the future either, just because of the way, I mean, throughout this presentation, we've seen the market is shrinking. To add a 100% duplicative coverage amount for the same asset, I think is a improbability.
Gotcha. Okay, so my last little tiny question. So does a matrix document exist somewhere with risk mitigation trade-offs? For example, if there's sufficient signage according to the law versus signage plus fencing or fencing alone, how much would the liability go down in cost? For example, if Del Mar were fenced all 1.5 miles?
No, nothing like that exists. We have, and we'll talk about in the next, the risk mitigation study, but all of that would be conjecture. As we've seen through this presentation, 10 years ago, we would not have ever predicted the liability verdicts coming out of, these casualty claims. And so to get down to a granular to say, what would one sign do, or what would one fence section do? I don't have that crystal ball, and I'm sure if we could figure that out, we'd all make a lot more money. But what we're really looking at is, what are we doing on the whole, and what measures can we show to say to our underwriters, and specifically if a claim arises, to a judge, our system in total, not just the rail or whatever else, is safer today than it was yesterday because of these are the things that we have done. Positive train control, our crossing, our new signalization, modernization program, which we're going to talk about later as well. Even just the software tools that we have on our bus, doing those Zonar checks and route monitoring, all of those things contribute to sort of our risk portfolio.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I would add to that the underwriters are looking, they've got, insurance is not an unlimited supply of insurance. Underwriters can only sell as much insurance as they have, capacity, surplus in their own accounts. So when an underwriter is looking at selling you insurance, they're weighing their capacity and how much they have available against other opportunities they have. So they look at you as a risk versus other people who are also trying to buy insurance, and they're going to sell their capacity where they can get the best rate for it. So the things that you guys are doing on the safety and loss control front, positive train control, cameras, et cetera, so tracking, that allows us to tell the story to the underwriters that, look, guys, this is a really good risk and a good place to put your capacity because this customer, this client is doing a great job of protecting themselves from, adverse losses. So it's really hard to say one sign will make a difference because you're right, that's projecting out into the future. But the story you want to tell is that you guys overall are a better risk than any other party that your underwriters could sell insurance to.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So on slide 5, it says there is a reference to changes in the tort landscape. Damages, caps in many states are being successfully overturned. Tort reform has become a kind of political hot potato in some ways, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on ways that there might be some reform that would affect the insurance market?
Yeah, this is Brian. This is Brian. I'll jump in and maybe Dennis wants something to
Go for
add.
it.
So if you're looking at the landscape of risk across the country, you've got different buckets regionally in different states. And what I mean by that is, for example, the state of Oregon, the state of Utah, the state of Colorado, and Idaho in the Western US all enjoy tort protections for public entities that are just not available for the public sector in California or Washington, for example. And so what we've seen is a trend of, well, one, where insurers were interested in writing in those tort protected environments, even some of those tort protections are failing either judicially or legislatively. And that's kind of created disarray in the market. So where insurers thought that they could rely on the safety of the protections, those are no longer there for one reason or another when it comes sort of down to it. I mean, you hit it on the head in terms of tort protections. This is something that would obviously give great relief, we think, to the market and should, and that would be reflected in lower costs and more insurers willing to write it. But the reality of trying to make that happen in the landscape politically, you could imagine is immensely difficult. The plaintiffs bar is very strong in these states like California and Washington, and those are would be hard fought battles. Dennis, anything else to add there?
Yeah, no, I agree. I would say it's California is known within the underwriting community as the most challenging place to try to win a positive jury verdict for a defendant, and it's sort of the environment that we live in. So tort reform would be awesome as respects folks in California, for those who have to buy insurance, because it would positively impact the results. But whether that can be achieved or not is a separate question.
Yeah, I will say that is on our list every year to talk to our government affairs, and it's always the first one that gets crossed off the list. So we breach it, but.
Well, also on that list is polarized political climate, and I don't see any changes in that anytime soon either, the way things are going, unfortunately.
Right.
Okay, I see no other Zoom hands up, so I'm assuming there are no questions there. Board Member Jenkins.
I have a question. There was mention about that we want to position ourselves to be a better risk than others. So we have a lot of projects coming up that relate to safety. Should we be prioritizing those to get a better bang for our buck insurance wise, or?
Yeah, well, all of those projects actually are as prioritized as they could get.
Okay.
So they're all up on the front. Nothing holding them back other than the speed, other than the time that it takes to design them and get them out in the street and get them implemented. So we're advancing all of those things as quickly as possible. But I think what you're pointing to is what are those efforts we should be doing based upon what we're seeing. And we sent out a communication a couple of days ago out to staff based upon seeing this presentation, that we're going to go back and start looking again at what additional measures. We've done a lot. Like we have inward facing cameras and outward facing cameras. We know we have cameras on buses, on trains, but we need to continue efforts towards taking steps to mitigate risk. A lot of the risk is on the human side of activities where you can't control it, but we need to make sure that we're in our best posture in terms of things we can control, in terms of employee training and readiness for work. That's an aspect of something that we've made investments, but we need to continue to make investments on. And then mitigating human behavior for things that we can't control, so that we can avoid, whether it be confrontations between passengers or trespassers with our services. All of those kinds of things are part of the strategies that we've been looking at and prioritizing over the last few years.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I think we've exhausted the questions. It was a great presentation, very informative. And I'm not sure it's a great negotiating tactic to show that we understand there's a range here that may be impacted by, but hopefully we can have it at the bottom of the range.
Yeah, they're in London. They're asleep right now, so
Okay, very good.
Should be all right.
Yeah, they're dialed in. But yeah, we get that. It's a challenge. The typically the harder you push for an early answer from underwriters on price, the more conservative they are. So it's a little bit of a push-pull kind of thing where we know you guys want to put it to bed as soon as possible. And also, as we had talked about earlier, the soonest you can bind a program, the better off you are, because then you've got certainty for another 12 months. So as soon as we expect that probably within the next week, we will have some certainty, and then we would advise that we bind a program as soon as possible once we've got certainty on that range. But we're going to push, obviously, for the lowest end possible.
Well, thank you both, Dennis and Brian, and we'll look forward to hearing how that all comes out.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time and understand it's a difficult and complicated time for everybody. So we're not lost on us.
All right.
Thank you.
Moving on to workshop item number 2, Sean Lufborough, our Chief of Safety, is going to provide us with an update on efforts to mitigate railroad trespassing.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the board. As discussed, we will talk about efforts to mitigate railroad trespassing, which, as we tying into the previous presentation, overall reduces our risk. Sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words. So we'll start off with the video that will detail some trespassing and trespassing events tied to recently one of our trespasser strikes.
A frightening scene in Del Mar as a man is hit by a train while running on the railroad tracks, and witnesses captured the incident on video. As NBC7's Lauren Coronado reports, the city's deputy mayor is calling for safety reinforcements along the tracks.
The man was running right down the middle of these train tracks. A witness tells us he was wearing his earphones and apparently didn't hear the train's blaring horn come his way.
As the train grew close, he became aware of the train behind him and tried to step off the railroad tracks as the train hit him.
Terry Gasterland watched it happen.
He was clearly thrown by the train. He wound up on the other side of the tracks.
She's the deputy mayor for the city of Del Mar. She says the man was conscious when first responders got to his side.
We need more signage. This has been something that happens over and over the years.
And just hours after this man was hit, we watched more people stand in the tracks, many taking photos like Parmis Hemrasfar.
I think we could see if the trains were coming in our ways.
Do you think, like, what if my dress gets stuck in the tracks?
Oh, no, I am now.
There are definitely dangers that come with it.
Like many people, Melody Lee and her friends crossed to the tracks for this sunset picnic.
We're pretty cautious.
Deputy Mayor Gasterland says she wants safety measures in place.
We need to do more to give people a safe way to cross these tracks, to make it crystal clear where those crossings are. And today's incident makes it even more clear that this is of the utmost importance.
And we're still working to get an update on how the man is doing tonight. Reporting in Del Mar, Lauren Coronado, NBC7.
We did learn this tonight. The San Diego County Sheriff's Department told us that the man had serious injuries.
Thanks, Anthony. A lot of our mitigation measures are based on Federal Railroad Administration guidance. They did a report to Congress in 2018. You're killing me, Smalls. So they did a report to Congress in 2018 that set the national strategy for mitigating trespassing. And in that report, the San Diego County was listed within the top 10 of counties for railroad casualties from 2013 through 2017. As far as locally here, where are some of our hotspots for trespassing? So this will include trespasser reports, near miss reports, trespasser strikes, and then incursions on the right-of-way. That could be automobiles that get stuck, or a car that's parked rolls down a hill and gets on the railroad track. So on the San Diego subdivision, again, that's for the coaster that runs Oceanside down to San Diego. The top three there are Del Mar, Cassidy Street and Oceanside Boulevard in the city of Oceanside, and then an area between La Costa and Lucadia Boulevard in Encinitas. 4 and 5 are Mission Avenue. Just based on the construction, a lot of things going on there. We have seen an increase of trespasser reports there. And then the bridge is number 5. As far as the Escondido subdivision, here's the top 5 hotspots. The difference between these, you'll see Rita Creek Bridge is 1. Then we have a station for 2, 3, really, and 4. And so because of that, a lot of the trespassing events happen in and around the stations, especially when the sprinters come in. People get off, they may try to cross the other track right away. So it's much more predominant at the stations themselves rather than open areas. So it's just difference based on geography and design. The way the Escondido subdivision was built, it was built with fencing to keep it secure. So a lot of our trespassing happens at the stations. So one of the claims that I hear quite a bit is that the majority of these incidents are suicides, and that's not actually the case. The accidents that we do have, these trespasser strikes, are a mix of intentional and unintentional acts. I do have 3 examples here pulled out from the law enforcement reports of what happened for some of these events. One of them was somebody that was attempting to take a selfie with a passing train when they were struck by the train. Another was a person walking along the tracks wearing large headphones, and they were struck by the train. And then there is, we did include one of somebody that intentionally did walk in front of these. So that is a false perception that the majority of them are intentional. It is a mixture of both intentional and unintentional acts, which results in these incidents. Another factor that we have is 5 new Charger locomotives. So we've received those in the last 60 days. We're doing testing and plan on implementing those in January 2021. So you're probably asking, Sean, why are you bringing this up in trespasser mitigation presentation? Well, with the planned doubling of these coasters over the next 3 years, these new locomotives not only being more efficient and more green as far as emissions, they are also significantly quieter. So I have the decibel levels there just for a rule of thumb. About a 10 dB difference between those sound levels is equivalent of either twice or half as loud. So if you look at our old locomotives, which are the F40s and the Chargers, that's a 10 dB difference. So what that's saying is our new locomotives are half as quiet at idle. And there's a difference of 6 dB at max throttle. So they're not half as quiet, but they are quieter. So if we do have a locomotive consist that's in push mode and that locomotive is on the back, the whole theory of see and avoid or even hear and avoid becomes much more challenging for folks because these consists are very quiet and they're getting quieter as we get the new technology in place. Some of this we discussed in the earlier presentation, but in general, some of the risks that we incur based on railroad trespassing, obviously the loss of life and injuries is critical and unfortunate. There's emotional harm to frontline employees, including instances of post-traumatic stress disorder for having to see the scene and be there for that type of incident. There is a delay in our service. Typically, it's a 2-hour event delay for just the incident train. And then depending on the time of day, there are other cascading train and other events that can cause delays for several hours and up to several thousand passengers. Additionally, there's liability claims. We've had 8 lawsuits related to trespasser incidents in the last 5 years. We went into detail for the liability insurance in the previous discussion, but at this point, I'm going to take it back to Jacob and hand off, and he's going to discuss specific claims in terms of liability due to trespassing with NCTD.
All right, thanks, Sean. So an hour was not enough to talk about liability claims. It's my favorite thing. So I'm going to dive in a little bit more here. I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we've seen specifically with trespasser-related claims. This is an excerpt from an actual pleading due to a trespasser strike with an individual, as Sean mentioned, taking a selfie. Incident occurred in September of 2016. Lawsuit was filed a little less than a year later. We were able to tender this to BNSF under our shared use agreement. The claim itself merely alleges a dangerous condition because walking out on the tracks exists and was known to everybody. And through discussing with BNSF, who again, we have tendered this to, so this is not NCTD money, but is illustrative of the liability cost, is that expenditures through trial are expected to be $500,000, and that's assuming that they're successful in that defense. So, you know, one that we believe we hold no liability for, no negligence, certainly, and we're looking at a $500,000 payout just in legal fees and costs. If you go to the next page here, you can see the court in the same proceeding, their position on trespassing. This was within a motion for summary judgment as proffered by the city. The motion was granted. The court basically said that even though everybody's aware that there's trespassing going on out here, that it is prevalent, that it was not enough to show any liability on the fact of the adjacent jurisdiction because there's no ownership or control. That was the sole factor. NCTD and BNSF are still in this case. And the only reason we're still in this case is simply because of the ownership and control of operation on that railroad. So that's where the liability arises when we're talking about this. So I know there's a lot of discussion about, well, they're folks assuming the risk or they're crossing on their own. The court does not see it that way. It's just merely because of the ownership. If you go on to the next page here, this is just illustrative again of kind of how people see the railroad. Here is an article describing how the trains are going to increase, how there's no more clickety-clack because of continuously welded rails. So not only, as Sean said, are the locomotives getting quieter themselves, the rail that they travel on is quieter than it used to be. And it doesn't look like there's any solution in sight. And this is, coming from somebody who's lived by the tracks and worked with trains for quite a long time, and basically stating that it is a dangerous area. Go ahead and go to the next one here. And when we reach out in terms of enforcement and education and things like that, we do have very strong reactions, not just in one jurisdiction, but in many. And one of the responses in 2016 was the most, I would say, aggressive response that we've seen when we went out and brought to the board to have trespassing enforced by our sheriff's unit. There was an AWW that happened to coincide, which is fortunate because there was no train traffic. But a letter went out to the community basically saying, let's take back the tracks and let's go walk on it to show how safe it is. And so these are the types of things, when you couple them all together, the risk is not because of anything that we do. It's not that we're running trains on unsafe manner. It's just inherent in the ownership of that. And it's something that we do need to take seriously. And so if we go on to the next, if we can all agree that there's inherent risk, even if we only agree that it's there because we have to defend a lawsuit where there is no determination of negligence or misconduct, that's a real risk and potential liability that arises out from the ownership of the railroad tracks and the right-of-way. And so the question then becomes, who should hold that liability? NCTD's position has been, as a holder of that liability, we should be authorized and be able to take any means reasonably and legally necessary to mitigate that risk, whatever that may be, depending on where that is. And in the past, we have transferred that liability through agreement. All of our coastal rail trails and inland rail trails come with a license agreement, and there's insurance and there's indemnity that's provided for that. In projects where the city or an adjacent property owner wants to put something within the right-of-way, we have insurance and indemnity provisions that are attached to that to shift that liability over. And so that's been our past practice. And just something to keep in mind as we're talking about the risk and the trespasser mitigation. As we heard in the previous workshop item, engineering efforts to mitigate trespassing allows NCTD a better story to tell and a better position to take should we be sued or end up in litigation. Nothing's going to be foolproof, but if a trespasser has to take a positive action, has to climb a fence, has to go around a barrier or something like that, it's a much better position for the district to be in to defend that liability than if it's just, hey, I've walked across this track for the last 20 years and I had no idea that this was wrong. And so, there's my very brief update on this. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Sean to discuss our 3 E's and the efforts that we're taking going forward.
Board Member Edson may have a question about your slides.
Yes.
Thank you. I had to unmute myself. So with regard to the Escondido subdivision, are there any suggested or planned mitigations at stations which have experienced issues?
We're continuing to do efforts. So there's a couple different ways we tackle that. One, we do have CCTV, so we're able to do announcements for folks that we see that. Depending on the behavior, if we do need law enforcement, we call law enforcement for that. Additional signage that we have put out to let people know that the tracks are dangerous. So I think all of those are in place and working. We are looking at our camera system. It is due for a refresh and an upgrade. So I think there'll be an opportunity there to provide some enhancements along the Escondido subdivision. But the numbers themselves were also significantly less than the San Diego subdivision. So although they were the top 5, numbers wise, they were significantly less than anything that we see typically on the San Diego subdivision. But it's still a risk that we need to deal with as well.
Okay, and then with regard to the FRA guidance that was mentioned that occurred in 2018, can you expand on what that guidance was?
Yes, so the Federal Railroad Administration did a detailed report to Congress saying, hey, here's trespassing, here's what we recommend. In short, what they recommend is engineering solutions that prevent trespassing, such as physical barriers or fencing, enhanced enforcement detail to try to keep people off the track, and then also an education piece for the local communities to be aware that the railroad crossings themselves are dangerous and the railroad tracks are dangerous. So to summarize about a 12-page report, that's really what they came out with the result of that.
Okay, and just one last question. Could I see the slide that's before slide 30?
We have more slides in the presentation, correct?
We do, yes.
So, yeah, we're not done with the presentation yet. So let's save any more questions until we're through the presentation. Then we can skip back to the previous slides and such.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so Jacob alluded to the 3E framework. This is how we're going to mitigate and deal with any safety issue. Trespassing just happens to be the one we're talking about today. That includes education, enforcement, and engineering. I'm going to go through some specific details that NCTD has done to try to mitigate trespassing using the 3E framework. As far as education, we do partnership with the California Operation Lifesaver. We do have a trained California Operation Lifesaver trainer that goes out and does presentations to classes. We also have Rail Safety Month. Rail Safety is a year-round event, but we do specialize and focus on it in September with Rail Safety Month. We have additional outreach events, community outreach, marketing videos, social media posts, and then also signage, which is a key piece. So I have a little more detail on some of our signage efforts. So here's some examples for signage in Del Mar that are used for education. So we've added about 40 signs just for unstable cliffs, because not only are trains a potential hazard out there, there has been the potential for a bluff collapse. So we've added 40 of those signs since 2018. We also added some C-Track Think Train signs in October. Additionally, we have 47 no trespassing signs roughly every 150 to 200 feet. And then we've also put some suicide prevention lifeline signs that are dispersed throughout. So we want to make sure that folks are crystal clear when they're on or near our property that it is trespassing and that it is dangerous. Additionally, we can use enforcement efforts to try to help mitigate trespassing. We do contract with the San Diego Sheriff's Department to conduct specific details to mitigate. They certainly focus on education, so the majority of their contacts are educational and say, hey, just folks, so you know, this is a dangerous area, please continue to move on. But they do have the ability to cite when necessary. And we can also partner with local law enforcement agencies when we do disaster drills or training exercises. We provide orientations for them on the inherent dangers and risks of the railroad. And we also teach them about some of the rules also that have to deal with trespassing so that they're aware and they can help us if they were to see people in and around the tracks. We've also communicated some of these efforts. Here's a couple letters that we sent off as an example. One was to highlight some of the additional signage that we put in. That's the one on the left. And then the one on the right. And then the one on the left was the additional notice of additional enforcement activities that we were doing. Again, goal is to reduce the risk that we have through the 3E framework to help mitigate trespassing issues. So overall, Del Mar Bluffs is our #1 location for trespassing. Therefore, it has received the majority of our effort and focus. We do have over 1,500 trespasser reports over the last 5 years, with 41 near misses, 2 reports of vandalism, and then those details that I alluded to with the San Diego sheriffs. They've done 36 specific operations, which have resulted in nearly 2,000 verbal warnings. They have had to issue 171 citations and arrested 11 people. So that covers the first 2 E's. So that's some engineering and enforcement examples, or I'm sorry, education and enforcement examples. So now I'm going to talk about some engineering solutions that we've done to help provide safe and legal crossings. So these are a couple examples in Encinitas. We have the Santa Fe pedestrian underpass. That project was funded by city, Transnet, and state dollars. Design and construction was done by Sandag, and that's been open since 2014. Additionally, we have the El Portal pedestrian underpass. That project will be starting very soon. That was funded by the city and the Federal Highway Administration, and construction will be done by Sandag. So these are different ways that you can engineer solutions to create clear lines where people are supposed to be and where they're not supposed to be, and really separate people from the trains themselves to create a safe environment. Additionally, other ways that you can have additional engineering solutions to help mitigate some of this is through our Board Policy 18. So that's the railroad crossing and quiet zone wayside horn systems. And this board policy is for cities to seek and develop funds, and those funds can be for projects that will maintain compliance with the FRA if they're seeking either a wayside horn or a quiet zone. So that policy itself is an engineering tool to help make the railroad safer from trespassing. And then finally, NCTD wanted to study the trespassing along the corridor and some of our hotspots. So we went out with a consultant to do a study, WSP, and they've provided that for us. I'll detail at a high level some of the results of that study through risk reduction and feasibility of trespassing. So the 3 areas that were looked at in the trespasser risk reduction analysis were the top 3 that I alluded to on the San Diego subdivision. So the first one is in Oceanside in the vicinity of Cassidy. The second area is in Encinitas between La Costa and Encinitas Boulevard. And then the third area is the Del Mar Bluffs 1.5 mile stretch. So the consultants went out into the field and observed the trespassing, looked at all the statistics. In general, I'm going to do a high level of each location as far as where trespassers are coming from and where they're going. Since most of these are along the coast, you'll see the primary travel will be from the east side to the west side of the tracks. Certainly in Oceanside, you can see the people coming out from a couple blocks off and trying to get to the beach. Additionally, there is some longitudinal trespassing for folks that are walking parallel along the railroad. In Encinitas, very similar to Oceanside, primarily folks moving from the east side of the tracks to the west side of the tracks, either for proximity to the ocean, businesses, et cetera, on the west side of Coast Highway. And Del Mar, there's the summary of the Del Mar. You could see, again, the trespassing is from east to west, more on the north end of the side. And there's also longitudinal trespassing where folks walk along the paths along the railroad, predominantly along the length of the Del Mar 1.5 mile stretch. So from this study, there was 5 recommendations that were given by the consultant. And these key recommendations were in line with the report to Congress that the FRA provided as far as the details. And again, they all focus on those 3 E's that I talked about: the education, enforcement, and engineering. So the first recommendation is physical barriers such as fencing and surface treatments. The second, for the educational piece, is make sure that there's frequent, clear signage. The third is additional legal crossings. The fourth would be intrusion detection and response systems for integration with enforcement procedures. So that's additional technology used to detect trespassing. And then the fifth is additional education programs. So as far as the trespasser risk reduction analysis, we have sent a copy to the cities, and we have offered to make a presentation to the respective city councils. I believe we do have one scheduled for January. And we did send a letter to the California Coastal Commission providing the update as well. Our intent moving forward is to authorize award of a fencing construction contract Each city will be individually brought up and will have specific schedules subject to board approval, obviously. We will also seek to identify funding for the other mitigation activities to try to see what else we can implement from the recommendations from this study. So as far as engineering specification for fences, the NCTD design standard is 6-foot galvanized chain link. There's 3 different examples of what that fence looked like. Pretty standard fencing, as you can see. With the request of a liability assumption, there is alternative fencing options. So you could go with either a 4-foot redwood post and cable or a 4-foot vinyl coated chain link fence. And again, that's with the use of the NCTD right-of-way. So as far as the current status of the 3 project areas discussed in the trespasser risk reduction analysis, in Oceanside, prior to the end of the year, we intend to issue a job order to the jock contractor for the installation of right-of-way fencing in Oceanside based on the results of the trespasser risk reduction analysis. And to best match that, we're going to use a 6-foot black vinyl chain link fence in that project area. Thank you, sir. As far as Encinitas, the city and NCTD have agreed to a framework for a series of projects along Coast Boulevard 101 in that focused area between La Costa and Encinitas Boulevard. It's important to note that the city and NCTD have really worked on an agreement or a framework that allows the implementation of a post and cable fence along this corridor. And the schedule of installation is scheduled with a design of series of projects that are in design and going to start soon along Vulcan Avenue in 2021, and then streetscape improvements starting in 2022. So that's the status of the Encinitas location. And then as far as Del Mar, the intent is by the end of the second quarter of 2021, we intend to order a job order to the job order contractor for the installation of fencing in the city. It'll include the boundary limits that were identified in the trespasser risk reduction analysis. And we have offered to the city the opportunity to implement an alternative fence style and or use of the right-of-way consistent with the agreement that we have already executed with the city of Encinitas. And I believe that communication has gone back to the city with a sample of what that agreement would look like. So that is all that I have for slides right now. Certainly open it up to any questions from board members.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Any questions? Vice Chair Feller.
Thank you. The new engines are quieter, and I heard in this that they are worried about the rails not going clackety clack anymore. I think that's a great sound, but honestly, the people are very vocal about noise. So I'm not sure what, what the complaint is about having the trains clacking. I think I'll bet a family that loses someone would be happy if somebody had given their family member or whoever, their friend or whoever it was, I'd be glad that he gave him a very hefty fine or a ticket for trespassing. And so I would also believe that we should be fining, 176 out of 1,500 possible. It just doesn't, I don't think it sinks in. And frankly, I don't know hardly any time that unless people are looking for something, do they pay attention to signs around them. So, signs is definitely not the solution. So I encourage, we're excited to have the fence preventing these lateral, the horizontal movement, you called it?
Correct.
Because that will stop a serious amount of trespassing. in our city. They'll have to cross at Cassidy. I feel sorry for anybody who's lost somebody in this manner, but you just have to gain control of your right of way.
Thank you. Board Member Gasterland.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is I appreciate the use of the video. The person who got hit there was the son of a friend. So Jack, I hear you, that when the family is involved, you know, there are so many thoughts and thinking. However, you know, I live right near the train tracks in Del Mar and in the area where people cross them every day. One might refer to it as historical access. However, what comes up over and over, as I go down there, you know, with my figurative broom and sweep people off the tracks, you know, what are you doing? And I ask them, what does it take for you to not walk on these tracks? And the vast majority are surprised to learn that they are active tracks. And that's why I liked so much the sign, see tracks, think train. And I'm wondering, is there technology that is effectively a pseudo fence or lighting? And I'm thinking of where I grew up in Washington, DC. The DC Metro, when you go into one of the stations or you're along the track, when a train is coming, there are lights on the ground. They're about a foot apart each, and they start blinking. They blink faster and faster as the train is coming closer and closer. You know that a train is coming, and you know that it's an active track. So what engineering solutions beyond fencing can indicate to people this is an active track and the trains are coming, and then related to this, that the tracks are silent, the trains are silent, you're not gonna hear it. You know, are there ways that exist to convey those messages? This would go into the engineering section. And then I have a question on slide 29.
The short answer is no. There's no technology that would provide a fail-safe measure to prevent someone from going into the crossing or to actively notify. There are things that we're looking at as supplemental safety measures, like installing, building out our wireless mesh and having cameras and intrusion detection systems. But those are not going to be fail-safe technologies that are going to be able to instantaneously always alert us in time to prevent a catastrophic event from occurring. In fact, those give us more intelligence of information, but it does nothing to remove or prevent the person from coming into the right of way.
Right.
So it's supplemental. So what you are describing is a supplemental safety measure, not a primary safety measure.
Right. Can we go back to slide 29? This was the same slide that Jewel was asking about, Board Member Edson. Here, so NCTD has been forced to defend against 8 lawsuits related to trespasser-related incidents in the past 5 years. How many of those were in Del Mar and along the Leucadia Strip and along the ocean side? But in particular, I'm interested in Del Mar since I'm in Del Mar.
I'd have to go back and look at our loss run to see. Off the top of my head, I can count 3 or 4 that were in Del Mar. But
Okay.
to give you a definitive number, I'd have to go back to the loss run.
Okay, it'd be great to get that definitive number. All right, so those are my questions for now, and I may have more as the Q&A and discussion go on.
Okay, thank you. I have a question on slide 2. So hit that.
No.
Oops.
Not 2. This one?
Oh, yeah, that one. I found this interesting that the Northeast Corridor is the busiest rail corridor in the United States, and no county from the Northeast Corridor is on that list. And 6 counties on that list are in California. What is it that we're doing wrong in California?
I think there's a couple factors there. One, you're looking at a much older system that's more urbanized and therefore by default has inherent barriers kind of built in. So I've ridden that Amtrak when I lived in Rhode Island, going down to the city. It's about a 3.5-hour ride. And for the most part, there was, other than crossings, chain link fence, a lot of times with barbed wire, depending on which part of the city that you're going through. So I think it is a much more structured system, whereas a lot of these more on the West Coast tend to be more open systems where they don't have that infrastructure that was already built in. And there's not as much density in a lot of these places, especially when the railroad was put in several years ago, 50, 60, 80, depending on which segments you're actually talking about. So that structure wasn't in place where we had already, that I think has been in place for a lot longer time. I think that's one factor. There's probably others, but just riding the systems, myself personally, that's what I had noticed when I had transferred down. It's been running for years, and I think it's been secured that way based on really a highly urban environment. It's almost all connected from Boston to New York City now. It's almost one big city going all the way down. So right. I think based on that, it's clearly delineated where that is, and it's blocked off with fences.
Well, 45 slides later, where you make key recommendations of the TRRA, I think one possible answer to that previous question about what we're not doing right here in California is that number 3 is number 3. And that the reality is if number 3 were number 1 with physical barriers that channeled the pedestrians that want to cross the tracks to the legal crossings, I think we would find an environment where there were many, many fewer trespassing incidents. So I don't know what it will take to prioritize the construction of legal crossings. As you saw from the PowerPoint, Encinitas has, we cut the ribbon on one at Santa Fe Drive in 2013, and we're going to have a ribbon cutting for, the shovel, get the shovel out and start construction of another one. But they cost a lot of money. And so I think that if there were any way to show that list of counties to our state legislature and get their attention and get them engaged in this, I think it would be very beneficial. So, Board Member Gasterlin, do you have another question?
Yeah, Tony, I completely agree with you on more legal crossings and channeling people to them will absolutely make a difference. I mentioned I grew up in Washington, D.C. I spent the first 30 years of my life using that Northeast Corridor train all the time. And legal crossings are everywhere. Here in Del Mar, it's 1.5 miles to the nearest legal crossing from my house. And it's, if I were a bird and could fly down to the beach, it's, a few tens of feet away. And that makes such a difference to have the legal crossings. So what I'm not seeing the legal crossings in the fencing plan for Del Mar here, a couple slides after this one, or maybe before this one. So where are the crossings in relation to the fencing?
Well, I think that Board Policy 18 points out that it isn't the responsibility of NCTD to construct the legal crossings. And so ultimately it is incumbent upon each jurisdiction to come up with solutions when it comes to legal crossings. And while I would love to change that policy and put the responsibility on NCTD, public transit is always starved for money. So the big question then would become, how do we get the additional funds in order to advance more legal crossings?
So I'll push a little bit on that. Related to that, suppose tomorrow we had designs that were suitable for 2 overpasses in Del Mar. and we could build them in conjunction with any other safety features that went in, that would be a game changer. But there's kind of a chicken and egg thing going on. You know, what does Del Mar need to do, the full design? Or can we have confidence that if we do that design and the crossings are ready to go in, that NCTD will agree that they can happen? You know, I'd like to push on that a little bit.
So not much of a push, because I think, you know, we are supporting a study that's been funded by the state. In fact, NCTD worked with your city along with Sandag to advance the local match for Del Mar so that that project could be advanced, which will look at identifying safe and legal crossing locations for the city of Del Mar. So we're totally supportive of the city prioritizing funding and implementing a project, and we stand ready to help the city go forth and ask for money once the city identifies a project that it supports.
Thank you, Matt, for clarifying that.
Okay, Board Member Edson.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, everyone. Also for the robust questions. This is a serious topic, obviously. Anything that deals with public safety is. But just to touch upon the legal crossing topic, in addition to grade separation in Solana Beach, we later built 2 overcrossings and now have a new undercrossing. All of those took a lot of effort by many people. So the money came from all over the place. It got cobbled together from Sandag, from Caltrans, from other sources. And as I think Tony mentioned at the beginning, a lot of this has to do with making the state aware and shaking loose some dollars at that level so that we can focus on this regional and local situation. So I had a comment, not a question. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Matt, can you talk a little bit about the plans for agenda items and this particular topic going forward in case anybody's reviewing this and is wondering? We're in a workshop now. No decisions are being made here. You've outlined a little bit of the future, but can you be more specific and let the public know?
Yes, sir. As we stated in this PowerPoint, each city that's identified has a different glide path in terms of installation of fencing. We've reached out to the city of Oceanside as an example. They had no objections to the project. So we are advancing, coming to the board next month, hopefully with a contract to support the installation of fencing within the city of Oceanside. Within the city of Encinitas, we have collaborated together over the last few years, and we want to coordinate the fencing installation with the city of installation in collaboration or in conjunction with the projects that are going to be advanced over time. The city of Encinitas, as you know, has already accepted the risk, and so we are moving forward to go with them. In terms of the city of Del Mar, we have responded to Del Mar's most recent letter and an email. We've copied the board on our responses to the city of Del Mar. We're still awaiting a response from Del Mar in terms of does the city of Del Mar intend or desire to use NCTD's right-of-way and or have an alternative fence installed. While we're waiting to hear back from the city of Del Mar, we're continuing to advance. Based upon my discussions with the executive committee, we intend to come back to the board in December with an update with the possible policy direction being provided from the board in terms of the fencing project. And as we are working towards advancing this towards construction for the city of Del Mar, we've targeted the first quarter of 2021 to come to the board with action to install fencing consistent with our standards that we've outlined in this PowerPoint presentation. So that's kind of the glide path. Specifically, I know we have had some feedback from the city wanting more time, but based upon this schedule, this gives the city literally all of the time that has been requested for them to complete their due diligence.
So in December, we will have an agenda item, and it's mostly informational, but it will also have the opportunity, if the board so chooses, to give direction or possible any other possible approach. Terry, did you have another question?
I have a comment like Jewel. I can wait until comments.
Okay, and then from there, it's, stay tuned. Okay, go ahead, Board Member Gaslin.
Yeah, I want to make a comment, and I'm making this comment as a person who represents the people of Del Mar, and this comment is not coming from the city. The people who live here really want to work with NCTD for use of the right-of-way in a way that makes sense and works. We have a citizen who's taking the ball forward on privately designing an overpass, getting the specs from Sandag to figure it out. There's some grassroots activity. And I have to say, the tone and the attitude of the people of Del Mar is fundamentally different today than it has been in the past. So I want to see this as a positive, constructive working relationship. I'm hearing a little bit of frustration in Matt's voice, and I would like to help smooth that over and make sure that these communications happen well. So, I look forward to solutions here that work for everyone. And I do want to comment that there are pieces of houses, backyards, structures that are for 100 years have been, and these are people's private homes I'm talking about, that are in the railroad right-of-way as it was traditionally laid out. So use of the right-of-way is going to be perhaps layered, but I'm hoping that we can come up with a simple, straightforward definition of use of right-of-way. Tony and I have talked a little bit about what that definition could look like, so because I've been trying to get some feedback, but I'd like to see us define it and to look at it and to come up with solutions that work.
Okay, and I will follow up and say that obviously this folks in the city of Encinitas are quite animated on this particular issue. They have been for many years, and I think for good reason. They have grown accustomed to being able to access both businesses and the beach by crossing the tracks, even though they know it's illegal. So it's especially challenging. I grew up crossing the tracks every day to go to school. And of course, that was in the 60s and 70s, and there weren't nearly as many trains, but we learned how to do it safely. And so the attitude about this particular subject from many people there is, I can cross the track safely by looking both ways, et cetera, et cetera. I will say that in my service as a member of the city council and board member of NCTD, one of the most difficult things that I did was counsel the mother of a 14-year-old boy who took his life. And we had to work through a lot of stuff. Most of it was just related to her own, the devastation of that. And there are many people who like to suggest that people who are going to take their lives will find a way to do that. But I can tell you in this particular case, a fence would have prevented a death. So it's important that we continue to work towards providing safe legal access across the corridor with a fence that will channel people to those legal crossings. So seeing no other hands,
I have a question.
Board Member Jenkins?
Yes, I have one question. Sean had mentioned about there's specific areas that the trespassers frequent. If we know there's specific areas and there's specific times of the day, do we ever increase our law enforcement activity so that we don't just rely on the signs? Like if it's, between whatever time and sunset, or are there things we can do that way in the immediate time frame?
Yeah, and Sean can provide a lot more detail, but it becomes a resource question for us too. I will say it was significantly challenging, and I know Tony was on the board in 2016 when we really ramped up those efforts. We we got a lot of negative feedback coming back towards the district in terms of advancing that. And we weren't able to really address the problem because, as soon as the police officers left, people resumed. And to be honest, even while the police officers are out there, people were continuing to do it. The other aspect of it is, we're talking a lot about our coaster service, but literally 2/3 of our riders are on the bus system and another significant portion on the Sprinter. And we have all these facilities, and we have this one sheriff detail that we have to make sure we're allocating those resources as appropriately as possible to support the safety of our passengers and our employees. This is critically important. We just could never just afford to be able to put continuous law enforcement at these locations during the peak periods of time. And trust me, you would have a long line of people coming in because they received a citation or were arrested.
Okay. And then one other comment, just to reiterate what I've heard multiple times. If any city, whether it's on the Sprinter line or the coaster line or wherever, has a particular need or priority, they can come up with the funds to help meet the monetary needs of their priority. Is that correct? That's what Encinitas did?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah. So just for clarity, what you're saying, I don't know of an instance in my 12 years of being here at NCTD where someone wanted to proffer, whether it be a quiet zone project or a safe access project, where they received any level of pushback from NCTD in terms of doing that. We absolutely support those types of project activities. I think Tony is aware of a number of years ago where we were trying to work on quieting, making it quieter with, and I had proffered out to our coastal cities and inland cities, looking to see if we could create more of a collaborative approach to leverage everyone participating to drive down the cost of implementing quiet zones. We literally put money on the table to help that. We didn't get any takers in terms of cities wanting to come together to collaborate with us when we did that. So there's no practice history whatsoever of the district doing anything other than 100% supporting it. And I do want Board Member Gastelum to know that I am super duper happy today. I'm not frustrated at all.
Yes, and I can tell you that I've had colleagues who were adamant that things are working fine just now. There's no need to pursue safe legal crossings because people are safely crossing, although it's not legal. And so then it becomes chicken and egg. Can we enforce? It's been quite frustrating and difficult to address these issues. And as much as I appreciate the regulatory efforts of the CPUC and the FRA to keep our railroads running, they can be quite an impediment sometimes to progress. It does take a long time and a lot of money to get these things done.
So I do have a follow-up to Board Member Gastelum's question on the claims. So of the 8, 3 were in Del Mar, 3 were in Oceanside. 2 of those in Oceanside, though, were the same incident. We were just sued by 2 separate entities. 1 was in Carlsbad, and 1 was actually from the vehicle, the locomotive itself.
Thank you.
Okay, Sean, thank you very much for putting that together. I will also add that a lot of very useful information is on the NCTD website, go nctd.com. Under the safety, click on the safety button, and you can get to a ton of information about why we are making the efforts to enhance safety in our rail corridor. And with that, I will adjourn this meeting. I'll see everybody in 5 minutes on the same Zoom. All right, same Zoom, 5 minutes.
The voyeur. I don't really freaking. Nope, hold on. Hello, Desmond checking in. Oh.
Hey, Supervisor, Councilman Franklin.
Hey, Councilman Franklin, how you doing?
Not too bad. I'm watching the sheriff tell us how he's going to enforce the curfew, I guess.
Well, is this an open line?
Yes, it is. We're public.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm hearing about the press conference I was on the phone. Well, I don't know. 10 to 5 doesn't sound like too overwhelming. I'm in bed by 10:30.
Hello. I would like to call to order the regular board meeting of the North County Transit District for November 19th, 2020. And I will ask Anthony Flores, the clerk of the board, to call roll.
Yes, sir. Jack Feller.
Here.
Tony Krantz.
Here.
John Franklin.
Here.
Paul McNamara.
Here.
Jim Desmond.
Here.
Terry Gasterland.
Here.
Joel Edson.
Here.
Sharon Jenkins. Here. Priya Bapata.
Here.
Okay, thank you. And if you'd rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now Anthony will provide a safety briefing and review evacuation procedures.
Yes, sir. In the event of emergency, I'll dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please use the stairs. Do not use the elevator. Once clear of the building, do not re-enter the building unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers, and fire alarms on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator located on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures, sir. That concludes my safety brief.
Very good. Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda, Anthony?
No, sir.
And do we have any public comments?
We do not, sir.
All right. So I do have a computer here with Zoom running. So as we go through the agenda here today, if you've got any questions for those of you who are participating remotely, if you just raise your hand, that would be good. And then I have visual on Vice Chair Feller and Board Member Jenkins. So starting the meeting tonight, we have some service recognition items. And item number 1, we will be receiving a presentation recognizing Breeze bus operator Sonia Fisher for her exceptional service.
Good afternoon. So as you stated, we wanted to recognize Breeze operator Sonia Fisher. Sonia's been a Breeze bus operator now for a little over 4 years. On September 30th, there was a fire up on Camp Pendleton in the Duluth housing area, and there's a child development center up there. She was operating Route 315 at the time, which ends up on Camp Pendleton, and she was asked to, after the end of her run, go up and provide evacuation services for approximately 50 students and teachers that were up there. She happily accepted the assignment and went up and boarded those folks on her bus and evacuated them over to a nearby center. So we've got a short video here with an interview with her.
I'm a routing, and I was waived by the MPs on base to go and help pick up a bunch of kids from the CDC. They flagged me down because there was a fire on base. There was a bunch of black smoke, and it seemed like it was getting closer. They were evacuating. They wanted to send another bus out, and they didn't have enough time. They said, we're evacuating right now. I got the okay from NCTD and went and got them, 50 kids. When I got to the school, they were ready to be evacuated outside of the school. The teachers, they just parked me and the teachers got them on the bus, bunch of little preschoolers. The minute we shut the door, they started singing The Wheels on the Bus Go Round and Round. And I knew everything was going to be okay, you know? So if you can calm 50 kids down, you can calm me down, we're good. Those are the real heroes. It felt like it was my calling. Like I had to do it, you know? It was something that, you know, I was made for. You don't get that chance to save a bunch of kids, so.
So we'd just like to thank Sonia for her service and her exemplary actions that day. She did a great job. She's routinely lauded as one of our finest operators, and this is an example why. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention, and I also thank her and on behalf of the board, her service. We've had some folks really step up and perform quite admirably in very difficult times. So to all the operators of both bus and rail, I appreciate the efforts. Thank you. Okay, item number 2. I'm going to review that. We're going to recognize Board Vice Chair Jack Feller for his many years of service to the North County Transit District. And if we could flip through these slides, we'll get a brief idea of his service here, starting way back in 2000. I assume you were newly elected about that time.
About that time, yeah.
And 2003, 2005 as a board member, and took a break and then back as a board alternate and then board member, and have been serving as the board vice chair for the last couple of years. And I have enjoyed having your efforts and companionship and input and advice. And I think that one of the things about serving in politics is that you run across folks that you don't agree on everything, but when you get involved in a board together that's responsible for providing public transit, it's amazing how we can get past some of those philosophical issues and focus on providing the best damn transit possible. So I know that's been your focus for years. And 3,650 days of total days of service. That's a long time.
I didn't get enough pay.
Yeah. Would you like to say a few words?
Yes, it has been an honor to be involved with this board on and off over the last 20 years. The part that intrigues me is the concept that people do need to travel this way. I'm a car person all the way. 50 years ago, I worked on underground on the BART system, and I thought, what a unique way to think about traveling for the future. And I've been excited about it. It's just that it's certainly costs a lot of money to run a place, and it's not always easy to satisfy everybody that wants to do it. I've been excited to come to the board meetings and find out what's the newest and best, and I think we have accomplished a lot here at the North County Transit District. I've been honored to be involved. Great staff. They're all out there behind the window in masks and in here, but just great staff. And I appreciate everybody's service and just hope it gets better and better. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. And you don't get reelected as many times as you have without being well loved by the community. And I know that you live for Oceanside. I've got a lot of big fans here. So, and I'm sure you'll continue to contribute to the community in the years ahead.
Well, I'll see you around.
Yeah. And there's a nice big plaque here with some information on it. So I'm going to give that to you. I'm going to pull it out of the bag because it's kind of complicated. It's got all kitchen wrapping in there. And
oh, nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very nice. Thank you very much.
All right. Yes. Thank you. So with that, we will move on to items B and C, which are the minutes for the regular board meeting of October 15 and special board meeting of November 5, and consent items 3 through 21. And is there anyone that wants to pull any of these items?
Move approval.
All right. I have a motion for approval.
Second.
All right.
On the combined motion of Board Vice Chair Jack Feller, seconded by Board Member Sharon Jenkins, to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on October 15, 2020, the special board meeting held on November 5, 2020, and consent items 3 through 21. Board Member Bapatel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Juker? I'm sorry, Board Member Gastelum?
Aye.
Board Member McNamara?
Aye.
Board Member Desmond?
Aye.
Board Member Edson?
Aye.
Board Member Franklin?
Aye.
Board Member Jenkins?
Aye.
Board Vice Chair Feller?
No, not yes.
Board Chair Krantz?
Yes.
On the combined motion of Board Vice Chair Jack Feller, seconded by Board Member Sharon Jenkins, to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on October 15, 2020, the special board meeting held on November 5, 2020, and consent items 3 through 21. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay, very good. We have two informational items, 22 and 23, and Anthony Flores, the clerk of the board, will review item number 22.
Yes, sir. I will go through a few slides and then I'll hand it over to the nominating committee chair, Ms. Bapatel. So a little bit of background pursuant to, excuse me, board policy number 2, in accordance with our with Public Utilities Code 125000, the board chair and vice chair shall be nominated each year by the board at its December meeting. The board chair and vice chair shall elect its and shall be elected at its January meeting. The election of the board chair and vice chair, the board chair shall appoint a 3-person nominating committee, which we did in October. The nominating committee shall present its recommendations to the full board, and the board, again, the board chair and vice chair will be elected at the January meeting. Only voting members are eligible to serve as the board chair and vice chair and as a member of the nominating committee. As a reminder, we do have an advisory member appointed by the city of San Diego, in which they have not made their appointment to date. At the October meeting, the board chair, in concurrence with the full board, appointed the following board members to serve on the nominating committee for calendar year 2021. Priya Bapatel, council member, City of Carlsbad, as the chair. Paul McNamara, Mayor, City of San Diego, Escondido. Jim Desmond, Supervisor, County of San Diego. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Bapatel for their report.
Thanks, Anthony. Sure. So the nominating committee has had the opportunity to meet a couple of times over the duration of the last couple of months. And today we came to the decision that we would be moving forward with the recommendation of nominating Chair Kranz to another term as chair and board member Edson as vice chair for the vice chair position. And so that would be our recommendation, and that's where we're at with the status of our recommendation. And I'd be happy to allow our other nominating committee members any particular comments that they'd like to add, but that's basically the, a conversation we've had together. So thank you.
Okay, board member Desmond or McNamara, do you have anything to add?
Not really. That was the committee's decision.
No, I don't have anything to add either, Tony.
Okay, and the how many nominees, how many submittals for appointment were there?
We had one for the chair position and 2 for the vice chair, sir.
Okay, the 2, and so was it, I believe, Board Member Jenkins, and then obviously Board Member Edson. Was it a unanimous vote?
Correct. Yeah, it was a unanimous vote.
Okay.
With that being said, the next steps, the nominating committee will submit its final nominations to the board chair and vice chair positions at the December meeting for approval, and the full board of directors will officially elect the board chair and vice chair at its January 21, 2021 board meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 23. We're going to receive an update on the signal and grade crossing modernization project. And Zachary Taylor, our signal manager, will review this item.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. Can everybody hear me? I think so. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Zachary Taylor. I'm a signal manager here at NCTD, and today I'm going to be presenting to you on the signal optimization program that we're endeavoring here over the next few years on. It's a number of different projects, and we'll be going through those each individually and also just discussing what the purpose of the program is. So first, the background. We have about a little over $30 million worth of grants and money that has been awarded from federal, state, and local agencies that are all targeted towards improving our signal system. So we'll go into the next slide where exactly all those will be put around. And also, okay, thank you. And also PRE is the contractor that we've elected to do the design work on this for us. So as you can see from this slide, we have about $2 million worth of design work, followed up by about a little over $30 million worth of construction work, and the funds are coming from various different locations as shown there. This project will fund 3 different major projects that we have called out here, and we'll go into these in detail. CP Broadway, the OTC pedestrian crossing, and a larger project that we've split into multiple phases, which is the legacy equipment replacement project. So from those projects, we have these further divided, and the previous slide showed what we have budgeted. This slide shows some projects that we have, not all of which are budgeted, but the totals that would be required to complete all of these projects. So we'll get into which of these are funded and which are not funded, but these are just the totals that it would take estimated for construction on all of these projects that are listed here. Okay, so the first project here is the coaster braking analysis. The purpose of this project is to improve customer experience and train speed around the Oceanside Transit Center area. We're going to be modifying some signals that will allow for faster movement of the trains in and out of the Oceanside Transit area. So this will improve customer experience, and we're also going to shore up some existing braking calculation discrepancies at other locations throughout the coaster subdivision or the San Diego subdivision. The next project is the Sereno Valley Grade Crossing project. This kind of has 2 aspects to it. The first is to increase or improve public experience. There is a station just to the railroad west or north of the Sereno Valley Grade Crossing. Right now, when trains come in and do a station stop, there's a activation of the crossing before the train stops at the station and then moves forward. So the idea is to improve the operation there so that there would not be a false activation of that grade crossing. The other intent of this project is just to eliminate legacy equipment that is in these locations currently. Next project is wireless mesh. We have a wireless mesh existing infrastructure out on the alignment at the moment. Essentially what this is a safety communications network that is used to ensure that in the event of undesirable events on trains, that the public in the cars is able to communicate either with the head end of the train, with the engineers and the operators, or with a dispatcher in the event that they're unable to communicate with the front end of the train. So it is not currently completely covered system-wide, and the intent of this project is to cover the remaining gaps in areas which are Rose Canyon and the Del Mar Bluffs area. CP Broadway is a new installation of a signal control point. This is in support of the extension, planned extension down to the San Diego Convention Center and the San Diego Convention Center platform. NCTD will signalize existing switches that are currently dark in order to support this project. There's also a couple of other control points that are installed as part of this project, but those would be, that construction and that work would be done by BNSF as it's in their territory. OTC pedestrian crossing. This is the installation of new active warning devices and a crossing at the Oceanside Transit Center platform. This would connect the Sprinter platforms to the Coaster platform number 3, and this eases the ability for people to transfer from one mode of transportation to the other, whereas right now they're required to make a rather circuitous route around to make that transition. If we go to the next slide, this is the planned location of the installation of that crossing. So right where you see just right across the tracks there will be a new at-grade crossing for pedestrians only, and then active warning devices to alert people to the coming of trains when they come to berth on the Sprinter line. Okay, so the remaining part of the presentation mostly focuses on the signal optimization projects. And when we get to talking about that, there's an important distinction I wanted to make, and that is in the world of signaling, there's essentially 2 types of signaling we do, and that is train control. Train control is when we try and keep trains apart from each other, and grade crossings is where we just try to keep trains away from the public. So those are our 2 different distinguishing factors that we'll be looking through here. So legacy equipment replacement, this is like I said, a large project, and the objectives are to replace obsolete equipment with future ready components. That's going to support our zero delay initiative, as well as future higher traffic volumes, predictive analytics, and next generation train control and crossing systems. Just a quick note there, obsolete does not mean unsafe. Obsolete in this case means it is no longer supported by the manufacturer, which just means that they're no longer creating spare components for us. So as we get longer in the life of some of these components, they won't be available, which obviously puts us at risk. So we want to try and reduce our exposure to that by removing these types of equipment. And then as mentioned on the previous slide, one of the other benefits of replacing this new equipment, or excuse me, this old equipment with new equipment, is to go towards predictive analytics. And so essentially all that means is that we're going to be using more data, more information. It'll be more available to us so that we can do things like predicting problems before they occur, identifying problems before they become a public nuisance, and that sort of thing. Okay, so the deep dive now into the legacy equipment replacement. We'll talk about a few things here. What are the options when it comes to railroad crossing protection? Where is NCTD currently, and what are our plans? So right now, NCTD has a fair number of obsolete equipment. Those are detailed there. We also have equipment that is deemed adequate at the moment, which means it is supported by the manufacturer still, but will soon be falling into the obsolete category and no longer receiving support. It's also not as future ready as new components are. This slide shows where we are across our different modes. between train control and crossing control, with a breakdown of obsolete versus future ready versus adequate equipment. So as we go through these slides and we go through the different phases, you'll see the number of obsolete or the percentage of obsolete equipment going down, and then the percentage of future ready equipment going up. Okay, so what are the options for crossings? Because a lot of the work that we're doing is going to be on our crossings. So first of all, the railroad industry is highly regulated, and anything that we use has to be both CPUC and FRA approved, as well as industry proven. So NCTD matches most other freight railroads and commuter rails of similar type in the way that we do our signaling. So we're in line with the rest of the industry and the normal function here in the United States of how things are done at the moment. There is no system that is without risk when it comes to trains. Because of the size and speed of trains and the nearness with which we give warning when a train arrives at a crossing, sometimes if a problem is going to happen, there's no way to prevent it just because you can't get a train stopped in time. So obviously we want to do everything in our power to mitigate those risks, but it is just something that I wanted to note, that we cannot completely eliminate risk when it comes to railroads. Okay, so here are the various options. So the gold standard when it comes to crossings is to actually remove them altogether. Grade separating either through a tunnel or a bridge eliminates my job, but it is safer for everybody else. So that is the gold standard, but of course it is extremely expensive to do that. Without this, we can go to non-predictive systems. Non-predictive systems are a trade-off because you'll either delay the operation of the vehicle, which makes the customer experience not very good, or you'll impact the public and result in longer warning times and things like that, which the public usually does not want to accept. Alternative predictive systems, there are those out there, but mostly you're just trading risk around. You're not really improving anything. And then we are also looking into what we're calling PTC 2.0, which is when PTC, which hopefully a lot of you have heard about, will be integrated and work with our crossing systems. So that is not yet a fully proven and vetted system, but is something we're keeping an eye on going forward. And our componentry that we're planning on installing will be capable of utilizing this new technology. Okay, so what are we working toward? Right now, we're somewhere between tier 1 and tier 2, and obviously our intent is to go toward tier 4. As we move towards tier 4, this is just getting us into a more predictive instead of reactive troubleshooting, maintenance, that sort of thing, so that we're offering a better service and we're offering better experience to our clients as well as the public. Okay, so again, the upgrading of our signal system is a large project, and the question is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So the intent is to first eliminate obsolete equipment as soon as possible through the grants identified, and then establish a routine replacement program so that we don't get into the situation where we have a large amount of obsolete equipment in the future. So phase 1 of train control legacy, on the 4 or so following slides, I'm just going to identify through there how many locations we're addressing and the approximate timelines for design and construction. So I won't read all these directly to you, but the first is a legacy train control replacement program, and we expect to have construction starting sometime in this coming year. So this is our first project on the slate. Phase 2 will be addressing crossing controllers in the area of Carlsbad, 9 locations. Phase 3 will be going down to San Diego and working in that area with, again, crossing controllers, 10 locations. Phase 4 will be in the Encinitas and Del Mar area. And then phase 5 is essentially all the remaining obsolete equipment that we would then have after those first 4 phases on the San Diego sub. So this may change a little bit just based on Obviously, these are, estimates of how far the money will go. So as things will get closer, we'll be able to more fine tune this information. Okay, so I've talked about all these individually, all these projects individually. This slide is just showing what we've chosen to fund with the funds that we have available to us at the moment. Also noted on here is that the Sprinter is not in this program of projects. The intent is to get Coaster as taken care of as possible before we go and attack Sprinter, but that is obviously on the docket to do along down the line as well. Okay, again, program for the schedule of the projects that we currently have identified. A lot of the design work is going to be going on throughout 2021, and that'll be a little bit phased. We'll be getting it in pieces and parts, like I said, and then we will be going to construction after those are received individually. So a lot going on there. Hopefully it all made some sense. And if you have any questions, happy to answer those at this time.
Vice Chair Feller.
Thank you. I'm kind of wondering what happened with the Sprinter. It's future ready, 0%, adequate 0%, and obsolete 100%. Isn't that our newest train?
I do believe it is our newest train, but it's still not that new.
So think about it, Jack, that you're talking about 2006 technology, could be a little bit earlier in terms of the technology that was installed when the Sprinter was constructed.
So how old is the other on the Coaster?
So a lot of these are projects, will be the first projects that we've done on the coastal corridor since we purchased it from BNSF.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, so with this technology, it's not like a new car where they come up with a new model every year. The technology available in 2007 was the last gen, and what we're installing is current gen. So while the generation of software, hardware that's out there is only one generation back, it was released back in, I think, the 90s. So while it was, the right thing at the time, it has since been, kind of overtaken and is no longer being supported by the manufacturer. If
You
that makes
probably
sense.
need to make more parts.
And part of the project actually with the replacement of equipment on the Coaster is to supply us with spares on the Sprinter. Because they share technology, we'll be able to utilize all the equipment that's coming off of there as spares for Sprinter to give us more time.
Board Member Gasterlin.
Yeah, I'd like to understand more about the wireless that'll go into Rose Canyon and Del Mar.
Okay, I will try to tell you what I know about it. I'm not the expert on that, but essentially there are a number of nodes that need direct line of sight in order to contact the train. So because of the adverse conditions in those two areas, they were the most difficult to install with power requirements, and not as much line of sight. That's where the highest cost is involved. So I wasn't here at the time, but I'm assuming that's why it was not done at the time.
So, and I'll pick it up from there, but I know I have my IT chief in the back who knows a whole hell of a lot more than me. But this was, we actually went out on a limb and we're one of the first agencies to implement this technology on the railroad. This allows us, we use this as a safety overlay system. It supports cameras and other technologies that we have out there. So for example, we have the ability, should we have, God forbid, a catastrophic event, we have the ability to independently communicate CN rail cars. We can see what the engineer is seeing from the front facing camera. We can see inside real time. We can have emergency communications. So we did that project through a grant. We didn't have enough money to build out the entire network. What this project is doing is completing the design to build out the remainder of that network. Mr. Caston and I, we have already procured the equipment. We were able to find a city that we purchased about 76 nodes. Ryan, I think about 76 nodes for about $4,000. Which is the deal of the century. And so what we're trying to do now is do the next logical step so that we could do some things in phases. One of the things that occurred to us is that we have two critical safety areas where we need more camera visibility, Miramar and Del Mar Bluffs. And so what I've identified for staff, once we can get through these critical projects, oftentimes at Miramar, if we having a significant rain event, we're having to deploy someone to stand out there. We want to be able to get cameras out there real time so that the operations control center will be able to visualize that area full time at all times and make sure that we know what's going on. So that's what that project would do, would build out the remainder of the mesh network. Those two areas weren't done because obviously they were the most expensive areas and we didn't have the equipment. We now have the equipment. Now we have to identify a separate source of funding to support the installation at those locations.
So is this Ethernet? Is it fiber optic cable that's going to have to be laid, or is it Wi-Fi, 5G?
It's more of a wireless technology, similar to your home Wi-Fi. It's just, it handles, you can think of it as your whole neighborhood, everybody has their Wi-Fi access point in it. It's the equivalent of driving down the street and jumping from every person's Wi-Fi to the next. So basically it puts the trains on our internal network. So what would be going in is just the pole with the antennas on it.
And how tall are those poles?
It varies, but usually a little bit higher than the train is.
And how many feet between the poles?
It depends on line of sight.
So enough poles that you can have line of sight. Okay. Right. So in Del Mar, is that 10 poles, 20 poles?
I haven't seen the latest study on it, but we can get that information.
Okay. And why is it called a mesh?
Basically, it was put together as, like I kind of gave the example of home Wi-Fi. So it was meant to be set up on like street corners to let the whole city of where it was being implemented have access to internet or different things like that.
I see. And the price tag of $6 million, how does it add up to $6 million?
Like I said, I'm sorry, I haven't seen the latest study, but the majority of it is installation of the poles. Obviously, we've tried to step away from some of the solar powered nodes because battery life isn't that great. They tend to be a little unreliable. So some of it will be pulling that infrastructure in. And additionally, we will, in certain locations, be pulling some of the fiber infrastructure in so we can get those antennas connected directly to the network instead of having to relay from antenna to antenna.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Edson.
Thank you. Director Gasterlin asked at least one of my questions. So we're now at tier 1. We want to go to tier 4, which is a significant upgrade. Will this bring us to tier 4?
Yes, the new equipment has the capabilities to deliver the information. Now there's some other work that needs to kind of go on side by side with this. Just getting the new equipment doesn't bring us there. But that's part of my role here is working on some of the other items where we'll be able to bring in the information, automate its parsing and doing things, computer magic with it to make sure that it's delivering good information to us that is actionable so that we can then go react and do things that prevent failures.
Thank you. Computer magic's a good thing.
And the PTC system laid a lot of cable, and is there, how much overlap, how much interconnectivity with the signaling is using the backbone of the PTC?
Yeah, quite a bit. So we're planning on using that fiber that was laid that currently interfaces with approximately half of our signal locations to deliver that information back to a centralized source. One thing that we don't have right now is when the PTC went in, we did not connect with grade crossings. So part of the work will actually be to install fiber into the grade crossings so that we can pull information from those locations as well so that we're connected to all signal locations to get that information.
And there was an upgrade to the grade crossing in Cardiff at Chesterfield, and was the signalization updated during that construction project? Do you know?
Chesterfield utilizes the latest generation of technology, but it does not have the connectivity to our fiber network at the moment. So while we have good logging capabilities and information, it's kind of on an island at the moment. It's not, we're not able to retrieve it at a regular and frequent basis at the moment.
Okay. Board Member Desmond and Franklin, it doesn't look like we can get the parts at Radio Shack to fix this system. So we're going to have to leave it to Zachary here. Board Member Jenkins.
So perhaps you stated this in the presentation. What's the lifespan of these sort of systems?
Generally around a 20-year lifespan, 20, 25 years is kind of the recommended lifespan on most of these pieces of equipment.
Okay. And then so for the future, knowing that, are we going to have like a pot of money building so we know at some point, you know, kind of like deferred maintenance, that we will be ready when the time comes to have to replace these again?
We hope, but that's a big struggle. One of the key step, and I think you're alluding to, is kind of the asset management program, and we've made significant leaps forward. I think, you know, as we're talking about this, is important to know. I mean, we have a ton of work to do on the Sprinter corridor. The Sprinter corridor was set up a little bit differently, and we're going to have to go through phases to bring that up to grade, up to standard to where we need it to be, and that's going to be expensive. So the key is going to be, Sharon, is through good asset management, knowing what the vendors are doing. So if you get a kind of indication of when the vendor may be moving towards making this obsolete, then hopefully having enough time to be able to fund it. But it's a significant lift to do this. This is the first time we really are doing it, but it's a significant amount of projects that are going to set the stage for this. So I'm hoping that the next time we have to deal with this, it's 15 to 20 years from now.
And Mr. Tucker can tell me to be quiet if he wants to, but one of the hopes with future developments of this technology, and we're seeing soon and is on the development horizon, is that with PTC implementation and that sort of thing, we expect to actually reduce our infrastructure footprint. So maybe at the next time, you know, we won't have as much equipment in the field, and more of it will be either cloud-based, GPS-based, that sort of thing, so that the investment isn't quite as high. Now, that's all technology that's not yet proven.
2.0.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's the PTC 2.0. That's going to be led by the Class 1 railroads like BNSF. We kind of hang on to BNSF's ankle to make sure we know what the heck is going on in the future. But he's alluding to moving block technology, which would allow those trains to run closer, much more precision, and using PTC not as a supplemental safety measure as it's used now, but as a controlling safety feature. So it will kind of flip the relationship between signal systems and PTC today. But that's something that is really welcome in the industry if we're able to get more efficiency and throughput for positive train control and enhanced safety. It actually allows us to realize more return on the investment of positive train control. So that will play out in the future, and that's why we have that guy here.
We may not see it, but you might.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I see no Zoom hands raised, and I think we're done here. Thank you very much for the presentation. And with that, we will move on to item number 24, which is a closed session item. And I will remind board members that they will have to connect to the second Zoom invitation to participate in the closed session. And then at the end of the closed session, you will need to reconnect to the regular board meeting. With that, our General Counsel, Lori Winfrey, will take us into closed session.
Yes, thank you, Chair Krantz. So we have one closed session item today pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, Public Employee Performance Evaluation for Matthew Tucker, Executive Director. Thank you. So the board met in closed session today to review the executive director's performance and has directed staff to proceed with a summary presentation of the requested action on today's regular agenda as other business agenda item number 25 for consideration and board action.
Karen, are you? Mr. Kolsky is going to give us a little PowerPoint presentation.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I don't know. Can you just flip, Anthony? All right. Thank you. Brief overview, just a reminder that Mr. Tucker is employed via an employment agreement, which calls for an annual performance evaluation by the Board of Directors. The NCTD Executive Committee had a couple meetings, made some preliminary recommendations, and the full board did just meet in closed session to discuss those recommendations and come up with a consolidated evaluation. In considering Mr. Tucker's performance evaluation, the board considered a variety of achievements over the last year. These are just the highlights of some of them. They include navigating a challenging year during COVID-19 in terms of both operational and fiscal management, very successful grant strategy and applications, bringing funds into the district to support our operations in state of good repair, and advancement of bus and rail revenue equipment modernization, which is important for state of good repair and our customer experience. As far as the 2020 performance evaluation recommendations, the recommended evaluation rating is meets expectations, which would make Mr. Tucker eligible for the annual COLA increase provided in his employment agreement. There's also a recommendation for a performance-based incentive, a one-time amount. Both of these payments would be deferred until NCTD staff are eligible for merit increases. Can you advance? Thank you. Further, recommendation would be to provide an updated, amended, and restated employment agreement that would bring the 2010 agreements and the 2014 and 2017 supplemental agreements together into one document, providing the information on updated benefits, no increases or decreases, no changes at all, just restating what the current benefits are, and restoring the discretionary performance-based incentive provision. So the recommendation before you for consideration is to adopt the recommendation of the Executive Committee regarding the Executive Director's performance evaluation and approve the amended and restated employment agreement. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. And I would say that we are quite fortunate to have Mr. Tucker at the helm of North County Transit District, running day-to-day operations. It has been one hell of a year, and he has, I think, performed exemplary. So I appreciate your efforts, and with that, I will entertain a motion.
McNamara so moves.
Second by Edson.
Okay. Sorry.
On the motion of Board Member Paul McNamara, seconded by Board Member Joel Edson to approve agenda item 25. Board Member Bapatow, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gasterland?
Aye.
Board Member McNamara?
Aye.
Board Member Desmond? Oh. Board Member Edson?
Aye.
Board Member Franklin?
Aye.
Board Member Jenkins? Aye. Board Vice Chair Feather?
Yes.
Board Chair Krantz?
Yes.
On the motion of Board Member Paul McNamara, seconded by Board Member Joel Edson to approve agenda item number 25, motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay. Thank you. So moving on to the Executive Director's report. Mr. Tucker, do you have anything to report?
First, thank you, board members, for that. I appreciate that. It was a team effort this year. I do just want to mention the virtual Coaster Holiday Express. This is going to be Saturday, December 19, 2020 at 10 a.m. I say that because this has, been a pretty dreary period for everybody. And I would just encourage board members to reach out to people and encourage them to participate in this. I know the quality of the programs that the staff has put together in the past. And I think any moments of levity that we can get these days we should absolutely take it. So I would encourage board members to share that widely and participate. That concludes my report.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Do any of the board members have anything they would like to report? Board Member Edson.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for Matt with regard to that Saturday, December 19th, 2020 virtual Holiday Express. How do people sign up? Is this something that's easy to do on the website? Do they need to sign up ahead of time?
Hi, I'll take that question. Our marketing team has sent out information on social media, and there is information on our website as well. It's an online sign up, and I would be happy to distribute that to any of the board members so that you can share it out with any members of your community and friends that you have who may be interested.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And then in addition, I just wanted to report out on LoSAN. On Tuesday, October 27th, I participated in the LoSAN San Diego Regional Rail Corridor Working Group, which was held virtually. This is the group created by California Secretary of Transportation, David Kim, for the purpose of examining climate change resiliency issues and for developing future plans for the LoSAN Rail Corridor in San Diego County. The working group has paid significant or specific attention to the Del Mar Bluffs, as with coastal bluffs throughout the North Coastal San Diego region. Those in Del Mar where the LoSAN corridor tracks run closest to the bluffs have experienced and continue to be vulnerable to major erosion. The meeting agenda focused on presentations from SANDAG regarding the regional plan, the US DOT on infrastructure financing options. It included an update from Congressman Mike Levin, including his efforts on behalf of the district and the corridor, and an update from the California Coastal Commission on coordination efforts on the Del Mar Bluffs 5 and 6 projects. The sub-working groups also reported out on state and federal funding options, including ongoing grant pursuits and defining long-term solutions for the corridor.
Okay, thank you. And I also attended that virtually, and I think we are making some progress with regard to the Del Mar Bluffs. So it's great to have Secretary Kim's engagement in this matter. Any other board member reports? I see no blue hands. Okay, and Anthony, do we have any remaining public comments?
No, sir.
All right, the next regular board meeting is December 17, 2020. And today's meeting, I would like to adjourn in honor of Mr. Matthias Kemp, who unfortunately passed away on November 1st after a short battle with COVID-19 at the age of 65. Mr. Kemp was a dedicated employee who provided services to our riders on both the bus and rail modes. He worked as a Lyft driver, providing services for our paratransit riders from 2014 to 2018, originally with First Transit and then with MV Transportation. He then moved over to the Sprinter, where he worked as a train attendant with Bombardier Transportation. Mr. Kemp was a family man who left behind children and grandchildren who will miss him. NCTD greatly appreciates his service to our riders, and we extend our sincere condolences to his family on their loss. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.